Hi, I want to make a video on the eerie sensations of satisfaction. And when I say the eerie sensations of satisfaction, what I mean is when you're satisfied, you realize, like I mentioned before in my previous video, I mentioned how it's very fleeting. But the eerie sensations, sort of like the positive sensations of a positive psychological circumstance or a positive psychological feeling. They're very airy. They don't. You can't really put your finger on what exactly it is. Obviously, the fleeting nature of it obviously means something because the fleeting nature means more when you recognize how the positive and realizing the positive nature and how fleeting it is. The fleeting nature of it, the fleeting nature of your positive sensation of what you found so positive, and that leaving, or the fleeting nature and having that stay there and having that control your perception of that positive feeling and how it's very passive. It's very airy, and when I mean that, obviously the fact that it's very fleeting has some meaning, has some contribution to that, but also you can't necessarily put your finger on what's exactly making you feel so satisfied. And you're feeling that satisfied, but what's exactly causing the satisfaction? Obviously, if you eat a meal, it's the meal causing the satisfaction. But you realize it's going to be there and be gone before you know it. I guess it really goes back to the idea of things being really redundant and you're just satisfying a negative based on an addiction you had, based on your very existence. And I guess it's just another simple cliche redundancy that you mentioned, that you're not really satisfying anything but the same old redundant process, to do the process over and over again based on a projection, based on a negative circumstance, based on satisfying an addiction, a negative circumstance, getting out of the dungeon so that you can be satisfied only to do it again. And that's all you're doing. You do it again, a negative circumstance. You get out of a negative circumstance again and again and again and have it build up over time. And that's all you're doing. And that's the eerie sensation. And whatever it may be, a psychological circumstance, just feeling good, feeling high, feeling buzzed, feeling euphoric. It doesn't do anything beyond that. And I guess that's another thing when I want to do it, and when I mention this kind of video, is that's one of the circumstances, is when you feel psychologically good, you're just sitting there satisfied. You're sitting there, you have no other wants or needs. You're feeling satisfied. You're feeling a little sleepy, and that's nice. You feel a little buzz in your head. You feel a little, your ears are kind of plugged. You feel like you're kind of flying in a plane. You're in the clouds. But it doesn't do anything. You feel good, but the perception, like you could say, you intellectually understand this feeling, but you still feel it, but your perception's changed in the recognition. Your intellectual understanding can change your perception even though you have the same feeling. The feeling can be the same. It's the thing that stays there. The feeling is the same, but you just don't have the same perception. You don't have the same blinders on as you did before, per se. You know, saying, mentioning that from a reference from another video. And that's exactly what's going on. It's very airy. It's very thin as air. You can move your fingers through it. It's very malleable. It doesn't change much. And it is malleable because what you find so satisfying is very subjective, even though the things surrounding that subjective existence exist in reality, because you can put numbers to imply circumstances. Even though we don't necessarily know them, we know that blue is blue because by definition blue is synonymous with blue. And you can say it isn't blue to me. You can say it's gray. I'm colorblind. Come up with any number of excuses, but blue is blue, and it doesn't change the fact that it's blue. And it's something that exists that way regardless. So it's something that's not going to change regardless. Yes, and that's exactly what creates it. There's nothing more but the moving your hands, and that's essentially what you're doing. You're moving your hands, the eerie sensation of recognizing what's going on. You feel good, you're moving your hands through the air, and that's all you can do unless you run into, say, a table, and you can put your hands against the table and you can bounce them up and down and such. You can do that over and over again. You can bounce your hands on the table until your heart's content. But your heart's content doesn't mean much of anything, because it's a projection of value coming out of you that you're doing in a world where you're only satisfying negatives and interacting with environments and running into boundaries and finding ways around boundaries, that creating itself a problem for you to solve, to find a way out of. And life, like it is, life itself is a problem, predicated on a problem, created by its own set of circumstances that was a problem, creating a problem for a sentient being living the circumstances of its existence, creating a sentience based on a problem that existed, a set of circumstances, creating the problem for the sentient existence based on the chemistry of the environment that allowed life to exist to begin with. So you can move around, going back to the example, you can stare at things, you can stare at the wall, you can put your hand up your nose or pick your nose, you can do this. It serves a satisfaction, but it doesn't serve much of anything else because all you're doing is touching something else or interacting with something else. And you can sit there and do it all you want, and that mixed with the fact that all you're doing is just waiting for another moment to move your hand up so it can go down again, or the fact that you realize it's just a deprivation. You're doing it because you're not satisfied to begin with. You're not satisfying anything more. The feel-good feeling you have right now of being, ooh, I get a little buzz, doesn't do anything other than give you a buzz, especially when there's no mystery or blinders that are in front of your eyes to make it seem like there's something all the more grandiose and realizing beyond that. I guess putting all the pieces together that there's nothing beyond that mystery anyway, because if there's no mystery to solve, and it's already there. You already have the mystery solved. And if there's a mystery, if you can't solve it, what's the point of the mystery? And if there is, it can be solved. You can solve it. Therefore, once you solved it, what's the point? And once you realize you're just addicted, and it's based on the fact that you existed, and since everything's interacting, and you're only taking away from other sentient beings. When you put all these pieces together and you realize you're just going from one meal to another to do it again, to go through the long period of deprivation, to get the one single moment of satisfaction, the fleeting moment of satisfaction, when it means the most, and you realize that the negative doesn't mean the fact that you can't experience the positive all the more, the positive feelings, and recognizing those positive feelings don't mean that much anymore. Once you realize the fleeting nature and having all these things come together and realizing that it's just one single moment, that you get the satisfaction to go right back to the negative. When we put all these pieces together and you realize the positives aren't that positive anymore, and the perception gets in the way, the intellectual cognitive dissonance between what you're feeling, your perception, and what you intellectually understand. The perception changes, the feeling's the same, and yet your projection is, so your feelings are the same. You feel the same. Your projection and your perception are different, those things. So yes, I'm sorry. Your perception has changed. Your intellectual understanding allowed the change for your perception, your projection, but your feeling can still be the same. You don't have the blinders on anymore. Like I mentioned, all these things in lockstep. Once you take all these things away, once you recognize all these things, and once you realize all these things, not only determinism, but all the other things I mentioned along up to this point, you realize all you're doing is tapping your finger on the table over and over again until you decide to end, until you decide to drop dead, or you decide until something kills you, you drop dead. That's all you're really doing is putting your finger up your nose, and putting your finger in your table, and sticking your finger up your own ass. That's all you're really doing. That's all you're doing. Sorry. That's the only thing there is to accomplish in this existence. Is you're just touchy-feely until you don't touchy-feely anymore, until something decides in the touchy-feely for you. And that's all you're doing, is you're going to reach an end of no more touchy-feely. And that's exactly what we're doing. Very airy, very fleeting. Like I say, the fleeting has more strength when it comes to the positive sensations that we experience, because once you realize the positive sensations and how fleeting they are, and how all these things that I mentioned before, the deprivation, the period between time, then the whole deterministic things are going to happen a certain way. It's addiction based on a negative circumstance of deprivation to satisfy a negative that you have, not a positive. It still exists, but it exists as a negative. All these different things, no more mystery, you're reaching a dead end, there's no more blinders on, all these different things I've mentioned, plus more. You just realize that it doesn't mean much, even the positives, and that itself can become a negative, and it just adds to one of the things like I've mentioned. The negative, the positive becomes a negative, because once you realize the positive, you experience the things that make you feel good, you realize just how pointless they are, and how fleeting and frivolous and air thin they are. They don't mean much. They're very malleable. Just like I mentioned, the malleable of what your addiction is, they're very malleable because they don't mean much. If it can be changed, if the thing that you like can be changed. If I like potatoes, you like potatoes, you like saying a different way, it doesn't mean much. If it's subjective that way, it doesn't mean much. But generally speaking, the objective reality is certain things are deprivations. It doesn't matter to the extent, but they are deprivations, and that's the default existence of reality. So yes. Yes, potatoes, the way you like to say them. They don't mean much. And they're very frivolous. So if you have your take on it, and I have my take on it, it probably doesn't mean much of anything. If it can be so malleable, and it can be so in the face of it, it can be so against the face of what's really real, it probably doesn't mean much. As a general rule of thumb. If that's what I said to begin with, I'm just completely lost my train of thought, kind of. There's so many ideas going through my head at once, but that's the general idea. I think you get the point, I hope. So I think that's the only thing I want to mention in this video. I don't think I want to make this video go on too long or my throat's killing me. Anyway, thank you, and if I have anything else to mention on this subject, I'll mention it in another video. So thank you, and until next time, bye. Bye.